Thank you, Ara, for the really kind introduction. Can people hear me in back? If I just, I'm hugely grateful to have been invited here. This is, in my mind, one of the finest intellectual communities in the world, and it's a delight to go through and talk to my old friends and colleagues and meet some new ones. So this is terrific. I want to talk today about religious belief. Now, we possess many beliefs. People believe that grass is typically green, and that unsupported objects fall down. And these beliefs pose a lot of puzzles. Nobody knows precisely how to represent in the brain. Nobody knows precisely how we come to learn them. But they aren't that mysterious. After all, grass really is green. Unsupported objects do fall down. So it doesn't pose a huge puzzle why we possess such beliefs. Religious beliefs are different. And this difference was nicely expressed by H.L. Mencken, the famous curmudgeon and atheist. He wrote, "How is it possible for a human brain to be divided into two insulated halves? One functioning normally, naturally, and even brilliantly, another capable only of such ghastly balderdash which issues from the minds of Baptist evangelists. Such balderdash takes various forms, but it is at its worst when it is religious. Why should this be so? What is there in religion that completely flabbergasts the wits of those who believe in it?" Now, it's not quite the most respectful introduction to a topic of religion, but in fact, even those of us who are theists could agree with the spirit of Mencken's inquiry, in that the beliefs we have that come under the category of religion seem to be sort of different from everyday beliefs. They aren't acquired in the same way, they aren't understood in the same way, and it does pose a puzzle, how come we possess them? We know that the sort of beliefs that we're talking about here are a belief in deities and spirits like God, beliefs in the divine creation of humans and other creatures, and other beliefs such as life after death. And we know the people in this room don't need persuading. These beliefs are quite pervasive. Most humans are religious, and most religions adhere to such belief systems. The beliefs are particularly prevalent in the United States, the country in which I live, where over half believe in miracles, angels, and the devil. About 2/3 believe that God created humans and other animals, either directly as spontaneous creation or by guiding evolution. A bit more believe Jesus was raised from the dead, and just about everybody believes in God. So those are the sort of puzzles I'm interested in today. And we could break these down into two categories. We could talk about the puzzle of universal and near-universal tendencies to believe things. And then we could talk about differences across cultures and within cultures. And my talk will fall into two halves, corresponding roughly to these two questions. Now, one theory of where these beliefs come from is that we have a special dedicated faculty in our minds that is specialized to producing these beliefs. So this was the view of John Calvin. So Calvin, in the 1500s, suggested that God implanted within us a desire to believe in God, a propensity to believe in God that exists before any sort of schooling and experience. Atheists have a stunted system due to some sort of personal trauma or malice, have decided to stunt their natural system, but this natural system should exist in all of us. More recently, Jesse Bering has argued that certain religious beliefs are specific biological adaptation. So motivated in part by the work of Aaron Zion and others, Bering proposed that a belief in God keeps us moral. The belief in the scrutiny of what ours call the big God makes us better people. And he argued as part of an adaptation for our moral system, we have evolved a propensity to believe in such gods. I'm interested here in exploring an alternative perhaps most famously articulated by Pascal Boyer, which is that there's no specific biological adaptation for religious belief. Rather, religion's an accident. Religion's a byproduct. We possess certain foundational assumptions about the social world, and these make certain religious beliefs natural. So I'll talk about three such assumptions. The first is animism, a general tendency to see people and human action and agency in the world around us. And this has different manifestations. So one is a natural human tendency to see faces popping out of objects that aren't really people. And there's some famous examples of this. Somebody had discovered the Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese sandwich, causing quite a fuss. Someone else discovered the nun bun, the face of Mother Teresa inside a baked good. And about 4 days ago, I found on the web this more recent example, which is not entirely impressive, but bird dropping showing images. Christ. Now, another manifestation of this is to see in the movements, even the movements of simple geometric figures, intelligent animate motion, emotions, plans, goals. The classic example here comes from Hyder and Simmel in 1944, where they showed people the movements of various geometrical figures, and then asked them later to tell a story about it. And it turns out that people have no problem establishing a narrative about these individuals, giving them goals and desires, even different genders, based on fairly abstract patterns of movement. And this all attests to the prevalence we have to interpret these things in such a way. More recently, there's been a lot of developmental research showing that even young infants will interpret geometrical figures, will interpret simple figures as having beliefs and desires, as having goals, behaving in a rational manner, even perhaps having moral qualities. And I'm going to say absolutely nothing about this, except to note that this work was done, this is work led by Kylie Hamlin, and I'll talk about this in more detail tomorrow in my better talk. No, this is my better talk. And then to note that Stuart Guthrie argued I think convincingly, a lot of the beliefs that we associate with religion are the byproduct of this animistic tendency. In that we see in this world, we are naturally prone to see deities, to see spirits in the movements and in the structures of everyday objects. As he very poetically puts it, the clothes have no emperor. The second case study is dualism. And dualism, many of us associate dualism through the philosophical framing of this as a sort of a philosophical theory of the relationship between body and soul. And here the major champion is Descartes. So Descartes wrote, summarizing the theory of dualism, I knew that as a substance, the whole essence or nature of which is to think, and that for its existence there is no need of place or any material thing. That is to say, the soul by which I am, what I am, is entirely distinct from body. Descartes, this intuition is not, of course, limited to philosophers. It shows up in many aspects of everyday life. It shows up in a belief that many of us have that when we die, we will go to heaven. And not our bodies, but us. Somehow our bodies will remain in the ground or will turn to dust. But we ourselves will survive the death of our body, going to heaven in our culture, or reincarnating in another culture, or occupying a spirit world in another culture. It shows up in non-religious manifestations. You can immediately read the title of this book, Help, I'm Trapped in My Teacher's Body, and immediately understand what the book is about. It's about a student who, due to one various scientific mishap, ends up himself occupying his teacher's body. Of course, his body doesn't jam into a teacher's body. He does. This is part of a series. It includes Help, I'm Trapped in My Sister's Body, Help, I'm Trapped in My Gym Teacher's Body, derivative of that, and my favorite, Help, I'm Trapped in My Dog's Body. So I became interested in the question of whether we're natural-born dualists, whether this assumption of dualism is something which manifests itself because we're living in a dualist culture and dualist beliefs all around us, or whether there's a natural tendency of humans to adopt a dualist belief, perhaps because our cognitive systems for reasoning about the physical world and our cognitive systems for reasoning about the social world don't quite mesh. And I got into the idea of this question, actually, through a sort of a surprise event that happened in my life. And it revolved around my son, Max, when he was 6 years old. And this is a picture of him. And the situation was, it was very late, and I told him he had to go to sleep. And he said to me, you can make me stay in bed, but you can't make me go to sleep. It's my brain. And I said, okay, well, I'll stay up. I had some questions for him, made us some coffee. And then I said, what does the brain do? A sort of open-ended question, accumulate data. He said, millions of things. A person could die if their brain was badly hurt. It is an extremely important part of the body. And then I pressed him. I said, does the brain do this? Does the brain do that? I asked him various questions. And he said, the brain does seeing, hearing, smelling, and most important of all, the brain was involved in thinking. But it does not do dreaming, feeling sad, or loving his brother. And Max said, that's what I do, though my brain might help me out. So in order to explore this, I collaborated with my colleague Frank Heil and graduate student Catherine Cho. And we did a series of studies testing this in various ways, including a study involving brain transplants, where we told children stories about brain transplants, such as a boy's head into the brain of a pig. Now, and it turns out that at a certain age, when children are old enough to understand this, they go through a stage where what they say is, you'll get a very smart pig. But still one that has pig memories, pig personality, and pig desires. They believe that the brain is what they believe is the brain's a cognitive prosthesis. It's a person could use it to enhance his or her computing power. But it's not the self. And other research by Susan Gelman, Carl Johnson, and others have found the same. Young children believe the brain is important for sort of cognitive effort, like mathematics or memory, but not for your experiences or your beliefs or your desires. It turns out, I think, that some residual form of this belief shows up even in the most highly educated adults. So I've often been struck by the reporting in science, in the New York Times and other science sections, of contemporary results from cognitive neuroscience. My favorite being where often there's this sort of often the results of the studies themselves are important and worth knowing about, but often people are just amazed that the brain does that. My favorite example is this headline: "In pain and joy of envy, the brain may play a role." May! If the brain didn't play a role, it would be the discovery of the millennium, as it would prove Cartesian dualism was mistaken. But the headline writer didn't think, wow, the brain might be involved in that too. Recently, I wrote this up in a book called Descartes' Baby, published many years ago, where I talked about the evidence. And since then, there's been more evidence. There's been some work by Jesse Baring on afterlife beliefs. There's been some work here at UBC looking at evidence, both developmental and cross-cultural, suggesting that there's an intuitive dualism, that people will naturally come to the conclusion that a mind can jump from one body to another. But what I want to focus on, and not on the evidence for my claim, but on an argument against it, because I think the argument against it is a serious one. I think it's basically correct. And it focuses on one aspect of Cartesian dualism that stands out as among the others and doesn't seem to me or to anybody else who commented on my view very plausible. Is that there's no need of place. Now, it's true that we naturally construe ourselves as, arguably, construe ourselves as immaterial, can leave our body, can drift off to heaven, is not contingent on the body. But the idea that it has no location seems to many to be unintuitive. So if you ask people, where are you? Where is yourself? You will get an answer. You're in your head. You do have a place. Now, this belief in the location of a self seems like an interesting question, because maybe you believe you're in your head, among other reasons, because you know your brain's in your head, and you're a materialist. Another possibility, though, is that this is a fundamental intuition that yourself has this place that shows up even prior to knowledge of the brain and the brain's role in mental life. And this is something I explored in collaboration with Christina Starmans, who's a graduate student at Yale. And what we did was we used an indirect method with children and with adults to figure out where they think people are, where they think the location of a person is. And what we did was we showed them a series of pictures with, in one case, a girl and a fly floating around her in different places. And we would show them pairs of pictures, and we would simply ask, in which picture is the fly closer to Mary? Now, in some way, that's a weird question. They're both equally close to Mary. Maybe if it was in the center, it would be closer to the sort of center of her. But they're both equally close to Mary. But then when we compiled the data using sort of looking at all the contrasts, we found that they tend to think the fly was over here, behind her eyes, or around that part of her face right here. Now, this original study had certain flaws. Maybe they're doing this because a fly buzzes, so you hear a fly buzzing. Or maybe a fly is distracting around a face. Or maybe you most notice a fly above the face. So we replicated it with a snowflake, and we found the same sort of pattern. Now, this, we thought, could be an interesting case study of a dissociation between tacit beliefs and more explicit beliefs. And so this work was published in Cognition last year, but this is some unpublished work. What we did was we used an online survey method to ask people from different countries where the self is. We just forget about this indirect method. We say, where is a person? Like a person could occupy a different body, but where do you think you are? Americans said this: you're in your head. But the India population was more mixed. saying you're in your chest. There would be just as many would say you're in your chest as you're in your head. Then we gave them the same Mary questions that we gave in the previous study to remind you this is the data from the previous study, and that's the data from Indian adults, where, again, they were perfectly clear that the fly was closer to Mary when it was round her eyes. The third foundation after atomism and dualism is creationism. So creationism, like dualism, has long been around as sort of a philosophical position, and many people have argued that the design that's apparent in a natural world screams out for intentional explanation. So Cicero wrote, when you see a sundial or a water clock, you see that it tells the time by design and not by chance. How then can you imagine that the universe as a whole is devoid of purpose and intelligence? More recently, the creationist Michael Behe wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times where he said, the physical marks of design are visible in aspects of biology. In the absence of any compelling non-design explanation, we are justified thinking that real intelligent design was involved in life. It turns out that this trait, this jumping from the existence of design to a designer, shows up in children. So now many investigators, including Piaget a while ago and more recently Evans Petrovich and Deborah Kellerman, have found that children are more creationist than their parents. So if you ask children and parents, often from the same family, questions like, who put the sun in the sky, where did mountains come from, where did the very first dog come from, they're more prone to give creationist explanations. Kellerman asked the question in a different way. She showed children and adults different items and asked, what are they for? And gave them an option of saying they're not for anything. So children think that clocks are for telling time, and so do adults. Children think body parts, like the paw of an animal, has a function, and so do adults. But children are more prone than adults to think that an animal or a mountain itself is for something. So a mountain might be for climbing. Recently, my colleagues at Yale, led by George Newman, have published a PNAS paper where they found even younger children have sort of systematic intuitions that design calls out for intentional creation. So I'll tell you about two of the studies they did. And one of the ones done with 4-year-olds, they showed different objects in different arrays. And the question was, what did the girl do? Did she make this or did she make this? Turns out children are split. They kind of go 50-50. But then you talk about the wind blowing things about, and you say, what did they do? This or this. They almost unanimously say it made a mess. The wind can't create order. Then they did an experiment with 12-month-olds, using a looking time methodology to measure surprise at different configurations. So there were 4 setups. In 2 of them, there's a ball. In 2 of them, there's an agent that moves around like an animate being. And then in 2 of them, there's disorder created. Some orderly things become messy. And in 2 of them, messy things become orderly. And the question is, you look at the looking time measures to see what are babies surprised by. So here's one of the movies the babies saw. And that's the ball creating order out of disorder. And out of the 4 stimulus items, that was the one that surprised them. Babies were comfortable with a ball creating a mess. Babies were comfortable with an animate being either creating order or creating a mess. But when they saw order being created, if it was created by a non-agent, they were surprised by this, suggesting they have an expectation that it's intentional creatures, not balls, that create order. This is a sort of creationism about objects in the natural world, about structure in the natural world. More recently, I've been collaborating with a graduate student at Yale, Coney Banerjee, and Coney is interested in belief in an order that there's a natural order to reality, that events happen for a reason. And her prediction is that children will be more prone to accept teleological, purpose-based explanations for events than would be adults. So she did a series of studies. In one study, what she did was she told children and adults a story about a girl who lost her teddy bear. And they had to choose. This is a methodological design used by Deb Kellerman, which we're adopting here. They had to choose, who do you believe? And there are 2 different stories. And who are you favoring? So Joey thinks it was because Monica accidentally left her teddy bear on the school bus. That's a standard sort of causal explanation. Bobby thinks it was to make Monica learn to be more careful with her things. And that gives a reason to this. what we find is the children are far more prone to accept a teleological explanation, so this is acceptance for the teleological explanation, than are adults. Now, this being the first experiment, it was limited in certain ways, so one immediate limitation you might notice is maybe what's happening is the younger children aren't teleological, but what the younger children are doing is they're misinterpreting this thing. Maybe they're reading it as, well, it made Monica more careful for things. That was a result of this. And what the difference, developmental difference, is just attending to the subtleties of grammar. So we did another version. And now all the kids are told us, Monica lost her favorite stuffed teddy bear. Because she lost her teddy bear, Monica learned to be more careful for things. So we're just stipulating this. Now there's a disagreement. Joey thinks Monica learned this important lesson, and Joey thinks this is definitely the reason why she lost her teddy bear. Bobby thinks Monica learned this important lesson, but Bobby thinks it's definitely not the reason why she lost her teddy bear. The developmental transition happens later, but still the children are twice as likely to accept the teleological account as the adults, suggesting that this sort of intuitive, this belief in purpose and design extends not only to things in the world or animals, but also possibly to events. So what I've suggested is that foundational assumptions of the social world can help maybe explain certain universals that show up across different religions, such as animism, dualism, and creationism. But this is, of course, just part of the story, because what's equally obvious, along with the universals, is human variation. So let's focus on this a bit. So just one example from religion. Tim Taylor describes a certain afterlife belief, a belief in reanimation. So this belief is that after a loved one dies, the soul will go to heaven, but at some point, it will go into spirit world, but at some point, very quickly, unless you do something to stop it, it will try to reanimate the body. And you have to keep the body from coming to life. This is not an afterlife belief I possess, or anybody in my culture possesses. So you need to explain why some people hold such a belief and other people hold a belief you go to heaven or hell or you're reincarnated or so on. Or take creationism. The people of this planet have very different views as to whether or not they accept creationism or they accept a scientific worldview in evolution instead. Those of you sitting in back, here's the United States. That's not good to be down here, but the United States is unusually creationist. And then within the United States, there's considerable variation in what people believe. So this is from Gallup poll all the way running from the early 80s to the present. And what you'll see is this top line are people who believe in strong creationism. God created humans in their current form. The line below it is evolution occurred, but God guided the process. And the line below this is humans evolved, and God had played no role in the process. So any theory has to explain the differences across cultures, but also differences within cultures. Or a more local example from Canada. I'm nothing if not appropriate to the place I'm at. A 2011 poll found that 14% of people had a strong creationist view. 19% said divine guidance, and 58% said humans evolved through natural selection. There are two common sense views about the variation in religious belief. One is that culturally specific beliefs are learned by absorbing culturally specific facts. And the second is scientifically accurate beliefs that emerge through an understanding of science. I want to suggest that this is incomplete and this is just false. And my work here is actually done in collaboration with Dina Weisberg, who wrote a theoretical paper with me on this topic. Let's deal with the first one. This view is nicely summarized by Richard Dawkins, who writes, "A human child is shaped by evolution to soak up the culture of her people. When you are pre-programmed to absorb useful information at a high rate, it is hard to shut out pernicious or damaging information at the same time. It is no wonder that child brains are gullible, open to almost any suggestion, vulnerable to subversion, easy prey to Moonies, Scientologists, and nuns. Like immune-deficient patients, children are wide open to mental infections that adults might brush off without effort." The view here is that the child's a sponge. Now, there are reasons to doubt this, that children's psychology is as sponge-like as Dawkins says it is. For one thing, children get information from many sources. Some of the information can be false due to ignorance, and later on in life, some of this information can be false due to malevolence. People can lie to children. It's very useful to be able to sort it out. It's very important to be able to sort it out. And in fact, children are highly sensitive to exploitation in other domains, like sharing and with siblings. So if a child's with her sibling, and the sibling takes 5 of the cookies and leaves her 1 and says, this is fair, the child's not going to believe it. The child's going to reject certain sources of information. And in fact, the empirical work, and this is work done by Susan Birch and her colleagues, among others, suggests that children, in fact, are selective. They're selective learners. They will attenuate their learning based on the confidence of the person providing information, certainly based on a person's past reliability. And they will attenuate it based on age, though here the story is complicated. When it comes to facts, there's some evidence that children prefer adults over children when deciding who to learn for. But when it comes to aspects of language like accent, there's some evidence that children prefer children over adults, which makes a sort of logical sense, since the children that they're with is the community that they're going to be entering with and have to communicate with. This issue of selective learning raises some interesting puzzles. I've long been interested in the learning of obscenity by children, because also everything else just about can be ostensively taught. This is a this is a this, or learned from context. But obscenity has a special status. And in order to learn obscenity, children have to figure out, monitor subtle cues. So just 2 anecdotes for this. One anecdote was, as part of an informal experiment, my wife and I tried to teach our children a new swear word. At the time, it was eBay. So eBay had just, so whenever they say, oh, eBay! And our children found this amusing and somehow found this as funny and did not ever treat it as an obscenity, despite our best efforts. Somehow they filtered it out. The second one is an example of learning gone wrong. Slightly off-color story, and I apologize for this. But my son Max, actually, it was again Max, had a babysitter named Dina for a long time. And at one point he comes up to me and he says, Dad, do you know what the worst swear word in the world is? And I said, no, what is it? And he leaned over and he whispered, damn. I said, oh, okay, okay. So, yeah, that is pretty bad. I understand that. So why do you find it, why do you think it's so bad? Well, Dina talks on the phone all the time and she swears. She says fucking shit, but she never says damn. So now, so you might say, okay, so children are selective. They're a selective sponge. But that's not true either, for an interesting reason. Certain beliefs have a strange status. And maybe religious beliefs fall in this category. So Scott Atran says, in a response to some attacks on religious beliefs by the sort of so-called new atheists, says they shouldn't be taking these beliefs literally. Certain core religious beliefs, like poetic metaphors, are literally senseless in that they altogether lack truth conditions. That is, there is no logical or empirical criteria for judging whether such utterances are true or not. Now, I don't think that that's right. I don't think it's entirely right. People insist these beliefs are true. They teach them to their children. They believe that at least some of them should be taught to all children. They are defensive when people try to teach other beliefs about children. Here's one of my favorite Onion headlines. But I think Atran is right pointing out the special status of religious belief, something also pointed out by the philosopher Dan Dennett, which is that people are strangely reflective about these religious beliefs. So this is a point also remarked by the sociologist Alan Wolf. So Wolf writes, there are people who believe often passionately in God, even if they can't tell others all that much about the God in which they believe. And I think what we're seeing here is what one could call double deference. So people defer to experts when deciding which beliefs to adopt. But also, people defer to experts as to the precise content of the belief and or the grounds for believing it, sometimes known as the division of cognitive labor. What I want to suggest is that this is not special to religion, that it also shows up in science and morality. So do science. Think to yourself for a second, how old is the Earth? Well, I know how old the Earth is. It is 4.54 billion years old. I know this because I looked it up in Wikipedia. I have no idea how they came to that number. But now that I know that's the number, I'm pretty confident it's true. So if any of you believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, I would laugh at you for your ignorance, even though I have no idea why that number up there is correct. But I believe it because although I don't know the grounds for it, I trust the people who tell me it. I trust the scientists who would presumably write the Wikipedia pages, one hopes. And there's other beliefs that have, so this is the Canadian data again. And people who study religious belief and so on, psychologists are fascinated by people in the first two categories and talk about why do people believe this. But let's look closely at the people who believe humans evolved through natural selection. And I will tell you the one thing we know about the 58% of people in Canada who think humans evolved through natural selection. The vast majority have no idea what natural selection is. If you ask them to describe it, they would say, well, you know, things evolve. And then when you push them on it, like you ask them, so how did a giraffe's neck get so long? Either they would have no idea, or they would propose a view that there's some sort of mysterious evolutionary force that across the course of generations stretches out the giraffe's neck to satisfy its need to reach tall fruit. A view associated, of course, not with Darwin, but Lamarck. So why, then, what determines whether you believe that God created animals in their current form, or whether animals evolved through natural selection? I think the answer has nothing to do with what you know. I mean, for some people, for some small proportion of scientists or theists, it might. But for the vast majority of us, it reduces to the question of who we trust. Do you trust religious figures, or do you trust scientific figures? Take an example, a moral example now. And this is my favorite moral example. It was Lynn Westmoreland, who was a congressman, and he advocated that the Ten Commandments should be on display in government buildings. He then had the misfortune to show up on a television program known as the Colbert Report, where Stephen Colbert plays sort of a faux conservative and asked him various questions. And in the course of this, he got a question he could have never expected to get for his entire life. And I'll show you the clip if the sound works for this.
I think if we were totally without them, we may lose a sense of our direction.
What are the sound
You want me to name them all? Don't lie. Don't steal.
Now, so two things. First thing, the day after his representatives say this cut was unfairly edited, and he made it through 5. The second thing is he was ridiculed for what it was said to be hypocrisy. I don't think there's hypocrisy at all. I think he really did view the Ten Commandments as important, and that people should also view them as important, though he didn't know what they were. But this is a form of double deference. The same way, I think it's very important that people believe in natural selection, even though it's possible I really don't know exactly what natural selection is. There are other examples. This is a nice study done by Jeffrey Cohen, where he asked different groups of Americans about different welfare policies. One of them, the top one, was by American standards insanely generous. The second one, the bottom one, is by American standards insanely stingy. They were either, the Americans given these policies and asked to judge them were either Republican or Democrat, and they were told that they were either thought up by a Republican or a Democrat. It turned out that the actual facts about these policies had little force on whether or not they accepted them. What determined whether they accepted them was somebody of their same party endorsing them. Importantly, nobody later knew that this was why they endorsed them. They defended them on the merits once they were asked about them, not being aware that it was a congruence in political party that was driving their intuition. A final moral example, this is the evolution of Barry Bonds, is steroids. A graduate student of mine, Isaac Giroudi, was very interested in certain moral intuitions. He took it upon himself to ask, what do people have against steroids? If you ask people, are use of steroids wrong? They say they definitely are. People will rank them worse than betting on a game that you yourself are involved in, and they believe they should have criminal penalties. Isaac was simply interested in the question, why? What do people think is wrong? And it turned out he spent 2 years of an otherwise distinguished graduate career finding no answer at all to this question. He must have done dozens of experiments. So, for instance, some people would say, well, they destroy your body. They're very bad for you. They destroy your body, give you heart conditions and so on. So, okay. And then you ask another group, okay, so there's a new form of steroid that comes out, and it doesn't destroy your body. It doesn't do anything bad to your body. In fact, it gives you immunity to colds, and you're better. It's still exactly as wrong. Some people say, well, it's cheating because it's illegal. Okay, what if it was legal? Still be wrong. He came to the conclusion, which I think is right, that people think steroids are wrong because people think steroids are wrong. In other words, which isn't as circular as it sounds, people, for whatever reason, there's sort of an idea that steroids are wrong. Other people notice that other people believe steroids are wrong, and they assume steroids are wrong. Just in the same way that when running shoes were first introduced, they were viewed as a form of cheating. And now nobody believes that anymore. So things change just because people monitor community standards. I've suggested that religious belief is a product of universal and near universal tendencies. Is a product of, for the universal tendencies, foundational stances that shape our common sense understanding of the world. And for the differences, they're largely due to deference, often double deference, to trusted authorities. I think this holds much the same for scientific belief. That our scientific beliefs, our intuitive scientific beliefs, are grounded either in our common sense understanding or deference, sometimes double deference, to authority. And I think this holds as well for moral belief. I think the same considerations hold. And in my talk tomorrow, I'm going to talk a little bit about these foundational stances that are operative in our moral psychologies. Now, it might look at this point that I'm saying science and religion and morality are all the same. And this is actually not my view. I think in particular science and religion have rather an irredeemable clash against each other. I think because the actual methods and procedures of science differ from those of religion. So I think that there is, in fact, a difference. But I do think, so I don't think that, but I do think that. I think that in the heads of non-experts, folk science, folk religion, and folk morality come from the same psychological sources. Or to put it more succinctly, there's nothing special about religion. Thank you.